to Mindvine, a mental health podcast for everyone. Since our first episode in 2016, we have been sharing stories of recovery, engaging with experts, and tackling the stigma associated with mental illness. The Mindvine podcast is produced by Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health Sciences and is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Welcome to the Mindvine podcast. My name is Darryl Mathers and I'm your host today. And we have two very special guests talking about youth mental health and something that's really close to their hearts and the work they do to support youth mental health in our community and on Ontario Shores. Pleased to welcome Debbie and Mel Clench. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about your son Shane, and there's lots to get into, but maybe we could just start by telling us about Shane and what type of person he was.
Shane, he was very outgoing when he was younger. He loved hockey and his music, played piano, guitar, and when he got into high school, he started doing playing the trombone and the steel kettle band on the Caribbean drums, steel drums, yeah.
Yeah, he was a funny kid. He was always like a jokester. He always had a funny grin. He liked his bikes and skating for sure, for hockey. Loved going camping. We always went camping as a family, and we had another family we had met actually when I was pregnant, and Christine was pregnant with our first. So we kind of met in prenatal classes, and we've been friends ever since. And they had 2 girls and a boy, and we had 2 girls and a boy, and the ages matched. So we spent a lot of summers up camping, and they were going exploring, always coming back with lizards, fish, frogs, snakes. It's like, get the snakes out of here. So quite outdoorsy, very adventurous. He did beavers and scouts, the air cadets. Music was big in his life. He was, even from like age 2 when the 2 girls were taking piano, he was going, look at mommy, I'm pianoing. I said, okay, that's good. Except when I got him into piano, he didn't want to practice. But yeah, so he was just a very, very easygoing, very loving, very empathetic type of person. I think he could feel the emotions in the room. So I think that, like some people say, he was an empath. So he was picking up others' emotions and carrying that with him. So I think that had a big part of his years later on. Anxiety was a big part of his life. He was bullied a lot at school. So I think that contributed to a lot of things as well. And he was very close, like the 3 of them, we had 2 girls and a boy, so they were very close together. They always did lots of things together. Shannon, our middle one, and him did skiing and boarding. And we always did, was it Blue Mountain, or what was it called?
We usually went to Dagmar.
Dagmar. But then we went up to Blue Mountain a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Yeah, anything to do with outdoors and sports and adventure. He did whitewater rafting. We did, just lots of things together.
So when you talk about Shane and his mental health journey, you kind of alluded to, the anxiety and bullying. But at what point in his life did you start to notice that he might be struggling with some mental health issues?
He was really young, 7 or 8 years of age. I noticed there was something going on. Went to the family doctor. He was having a lot of stomach issues, so he was tested at Sick Kids for Crohn's and colitis, and they were looking at cardiac because he was complaining of chest pains. So very, very young. I said there was, something going on, so the family doctor referred him to a clinic in Scarborough where we didn't even know what it was all about. It was called the Brave Bears. They never told, it was a group. So he was taking part in this group, and then the parents were taking part in the group, but no one told us he had anxiety. It wasn't until we got to the Shores that they said, oh, do you know he has anxiety? And we go, no. So it was from like 7 or 8 years of age until he was 16. All that time we were dealing with what we thought was something medical, and it turned out it was all mental health.
So you talk about him receiving care at Ontario Shores. What was going on in his life at that point in terms of his journey with mental health that led him, to be in our care?
So what happened was he stopped going to school. He refused to go to school, and I said, "What's going on at school?" And he said, "I just can't go." So I was forcing him to go because I didn't know mental health was an issue at that point. I knew something was up, but I didn't know exactly what that was. It wasn't until 2013, Christmas Eve, that he was threatening and attempting suicide, and that's how he got into the Shores. So I had phoned around to a few places. The VP at his high school said, "Have you contacted Ontario Shores?" And I go, "I don't even know what that is." So she was the one who kind of gave me all the information. I went to the doctor and said, "Sign this," and got the referral in, and then he got into the Shores. So
you think back to that time as a parent, and your son at that point is just talking about suicide. What's that experience like? Just being a parent myself, I just think about how helpless a feeling that must have been. But there must have been so much going on in your life at that point. Like, what was that time like?
Intense. Not so much helplessness, but at the point, like, what can I do? I kind of jumped into the mama bear. Okay, what do we need to do? What do we have to get done? We can fix this. Kind of jumping into that fix-it mode. Trying to figure out where to go was a huge problem. The way back then, mental health wasn't talked about as much as it is now. Resources were few and far between. Who do you contact? Where do you go? I think were the biggest questions. So it was more, not so much helplessness, it's more like you're floundering, like you feel like you're in the middle of the ocean, just kind of keeping your head above the water. And at the same time, you're thinking at any moment, this could become a reality where he isn't with us anymore.
So when he was in care, and maybe we could talk about that experience, and maybe, obviously, I know he was just discharged at one point, but maybe walk us through, as hard as it is to, the process of the steps that ultimately led to losing him.
Okay. So did you want to jump in? You good?
No, you're doing well.
He doesn't want to cry on. So what happened was, after his suicide attempt, he was in a day program at the same center in Scarborough where he was. The psychiatrist there said, they had dropped the ball when he was younger. They had promised, so he was doing the day program, and then they had promised that he would get a social worker and he would be receiving weekly therapy. We had waited the whole summer and nothing happened. I kept calling. A friend of ours had her son there, so she gave me the name of his social worker. So I called up and I said, okay, psychiatrist said he's supposed to be getting a social worker. How can you help us? So nothing was going on, and then that's when the VP said and suggested Ontario Shores. So we had the waiting period. So while we were going through all of that, I was still reaching out and phoning and Googling and figuring out where can we go. At that point, the navigation clinic wasn't up and running at Sunnybrook, which I think it started in 2014, the year he suicided. So just families trying to find resources at that particular time was difficult. Once we got into Ontario Shores, it was like, okay, we've got hope, we've got an answer. He's in care, and it seemed like all of the tribulations and trials coming up to that point was like, phew, I can breathe a sigh of relief. So I felt like a little bit of a burden coming off. So then the outpatient, he was an outpatient youth, outpatient adolescent, and they decided that due to some of the complexities that he would be best served in is as an inpatient. So he was admitted to inpatient adolescents, and he was there for 3 months, making great gains. They had a program up at Henry Street. It was kind of reintegration for schooling. So closer to when they were starting to get ready to discharge him from inpatient back to outpatient, they were sending him up to the Henry Street. Then something happened there. We didn't know about it. the doctor, psychiatrist in the adolescent program didn't know about it and wasn't aware. I found out again through another parent, because we were taking the WRAP program, Wellness Recovery Action Plan. So this other parent whose daughter was also in the Shores inpatient at the same time, and her and Shane were quite close, very good friends. They formed a good friendship. They had a pretty good group of kids in there. So they would drop him off at Henry Street, and he would walk back to the Shores. They would drop him off, he'd walk back to the Shores. So I said to the doctor in the inpatient unit, I said, something's happened. Have you asked him what's happened? He goes, no. I said, so right now you're just blaming him. It's all behavioral. He's being non-compliant, and you're saying that he's being difficult. I said, something has happened. So then the daughter of the mom told her mom what happened, and apparently one of the youth workers up at the school, he was told if his anxiety was really, really bad, he could call to the Shores, call to the inpatient unit, and someone would help him through the anxiety, through the panic attack. The person there told him that he wasn't going to have a phone call. He wasn't allowed to make a phone call. His anxiety got really, really bad, and she just kind of belittled him and told him that he was making wrong choices. Depression's a choice. You know, you better make better choices. So there was no security net there or safety net. So he just refused to go, and that's what was happening at school. That we found out later that there was a lot of bullying going on. So that's why he didn't want to go to school. So I met with the doctor in the inpatient unit, and I said, "Have you talked with him?" He goes, "No." So he said, "Okay, I'll talk with him." And then that evening when we went out, we took Shane for dinner. I said, "Did Dr. so-and-so talk to you?" And he said, "No, I didn't want to talk to him. I was so angry." He said, "No one believes me and everyone's blaming me." And he says, "Besides, I was doing my laundry," which is which is huge. I said, "Oh, you remember you're going to continue doing your laundry when you get home then." So he was discharged from the inpatient unit to the outpatient unit. There wasn't a real plan in place for school because he had refused to go to the Henry Street. And understandable if he wasn't being accepted there. And there was a lot of I don't know what you're putting down, I guess is the word. So I was quite upset with that. I found it out after the fact. So I did write a letter. I don't know what happened to that person, but I was hoping that she would get some training in mental health and dealing with youth. So when he was on the inpatient unit, he was making really good gains. Could see some of his old self coming back, starting to joke around again and, coming out of his shell type of thing. And so then on the outpatient side, we were told, because he didn't accept that program, she didn't know what to do with him. So she basically threw up her hand and said, I have nothing to offer you. And then in the next meeting, she said, well, no, that doesn't matter, we'll get through it, don't worry. And then when we met her again, it was like, well, where would you like to go? You're aged out of the adolescent program. And I went, pardon me? He's like 17, 2 months. So how is he aged out of the program? So she said, well, just finish up with so-and-so and let me know what your decision is, where you'd like him to go, and I'll make that referral. So that was that. So it was not what we expected on the outpatient side. It was just like things fell apart. So meanwhile, while that was happening, he had met a girl in the inpatient unit. He wanted to go to her school, so it was a long haul to get him approved because he was going to the Catholic school in Ajax, Notre Dame. They had social worker in place, they had psychologists, they had early childhood educator, and they had guidance, and they had the principal and the vice principal were all ready for him to come back there. Everything was in place, but they said, let's wait till second semester because it was, there was only like one more month of the first semester. So then he said no, and then the social worker on the inpatient unit said, let him start making decisions for himself. Let him feel like he's got some control. So me biting my teeth, and as much as I was against, I went through all the things. I went to the superintendent of education. Had to go to the high school for the public school side. I had to get special permission for him to transfer from the Catholic to the public. Anyways, this took lots and lots of time. So we got him into the high school in South Ajax. Him and the girl broke up. So the same week that he was told, he was aged out of the program, he broke up with the girl. because she had very bad anxiety too and was readmitted back into the Shores. He went to school, and the chemistry teacher, he wanted to take a full course load. He had missed 2 years of school. This was now grade 12. Instead of putting him back in grade 10, which is where he should have been, they put him in grade 12. So he had missed all grade 10, all grade 11, and now he's in grade 12. So he's in a full course load academic. And the chemistry teacher said, well, this is review. Are you guys stupid? So it went right through him. They didn't have any of the resources set up in the public school. I had asked for an IEP. I had asked for a psychologist and a social worker, and also someone who could, a safe place where he could go if his anxiety got really bad. He also had major depression. That was the other diagnosis, with psychosis. So he kind of started slipping back into a real depressive, dark hole. Refused to go, after 1 week of going to the high school there, refused to go. So that's when I knew something again had happened, something was up, but he wasn't talking. He just told me, I'm quitting school, I'm going to move out, and I'm getting a job. And I'm going, well, this is your home, we love you, you'll always be welcomed here. I don't want you to move out. I said, and where are you gonna move? You don't have a job, you have no way of supporting yourself. I said, let's figure out what's going on. So that was, so a week after, and then that weekend I had been speaking with the high school, and they agreed he could do one course at home, kind of online, and he could go in for math. And there was one teacher who was taking another student, again, who had anxiety, and they were going to do the resource room. So we were trying to figure out if he could take him on for math. And so I said, Shane, I'm working on it, hang tight. Through the weekend, he agreed that he was going to go back. So Sunday night, I said to him, okay, he got a shower, he got all cleaned up, because he had a couple of weeks of being very depressed. He wasn't doing anything for hygiene. So we had dinner, and then, he was doing some games and whatnot. And I said, at midnight, I said, hey, it's time to turn off the TV, time to, if you're going to go to school tomorrow, you did promise, let's see how you make out in the morning. And it was that night that he suicided. So it was like, I don't know, it was like, why? So I think that's the major question that anybody who has to deal with someone who's suicided is the question, why? Yeah. What happened? What happened at that particular moment, at that time, that made him decide that there was no other answer?
I know it's been a while, but I am still, my condolences, for your loss. It's as a parent, it's one of the most you hope unimaginable things that could happen. How did you deal with that, with your own mental health? Right, you're dealing, obviously, losing Shane. That unfortunately his journey, ended. But your journey with mental health is still going on in terms of dealing with the loss. So, in the aftermath, how did you both deal with, or how do you continue to deal with that loss?
Excuse me. Me, myself, I shut down for 2 years, didn't do a thing. Until finally Debbie gave me a bit of a kick in the ass one day and said, if I can't get back to work, go volunteer somewhere. So that's when I started volunteering at the Ability Center. And now I do a lot of volunteering with different organizations for the golf tournaments and things like that.
And you, how did you, I know you're heavily involved in the hospital now. This was, 8 years ago.
8 years ago.
What was the process like for you for trying to move forward as best you can?
Yeah, so I think it's, with the loss of suicide, it's the shock, the dismay. So initially it was, again, jump into, okay, what needs to be done, making the funeral arrangements, and just needing to do what had to be done. Mel did shut down. 2.5, 3 years. He did start it with some volunteering, but it was more like after 5 years that he started coming around. So we still had 2 girls. We had a house, a mortgage. So it was put, okay, I couldn't process the grief. I couldn't process the loss. It was like, okay, let's just put it on the back burner, and it's just do what you have to get done to kind of survive. So it was more me just kind of jumping back into action again and seeing what needed to be done to get everybody else in a good spot. So Megan was at a crossroads with her studies. The girls both went back to university. Megan didn't let her Guelph University know about the loss. They were writing exams. Shannon actually did let North Bay know that about the death, so they were good about letting her kind of see how she was for writing exams and everything like that. But I think Megan again kind of shut down and was again pushing back on that loss and just trying to have some normalcy in her life and just exams, I have to study. So I think she was the same as myself in terms of, okay, we put it back and just see what we have to do. The process is still ongoing. There are times where waves of grief come up. I'm just now starting to deal with the grief, starting maybe about last year, 7 years in. And it's something that never leaves you. You don't get over, and suicide is a different type of grief from losing a grandparent or losing a spouse or through cancer or whatever. There's a lot of tragedy around it. There's a lot of people who are impacted by it, and there's just that whole it's usually a violent death, and it's that shock, just that shock of and the never-ending question of why, or what if I had stayed up with him that night, or what if I really asked him what was going on. But he looked happy at that particular time, that day. It was like a calmness was in him because he was like, okay, made the decision, I'm going back to school, kind of making a plan. So the journey is kind of ongoing, and what I really wanted was no other family to have to deal with suicide of a youth. Losing a child is devastating. It's not comparable to anything else. So I didn't want the Shores to be accountable, and yet I did want them to be accountable. I wanted them to know that there's gaps in the system, that they're between age 16 and 27. If you're 17 one day and the next day you're 18, all of the supports and services that were there in the adolescent side are now gone because the next day you turned 18. It doesn't make sense. You're the same person you were yesterday. Nothing has changed from yesterday to today. And yet, in the government's eyes, the ones that do the policies, you're no longer eligible for services. And the adult services, are even worse at that particular time.
Availability,
yeah. So, we were told there was a 2 to 3 year wait, and I'm going, well, if you knew he was adolescent and he was at the Shores, why couldn't you have put him on the list 2 years ago? It didn't make sense that there wasn't some kind of a mechanism or some kind of a path where if you're in the inpatient adolescent or outpatient adolescent, where is the way to get into the adult side without having to sit on the sidelines for 2-3 years again, waiting for services. So I just kind of took that on as, that's something that needs to be dealt with, and that's something that, there needs to be a process, and there needs to be something filling that gapping hole. So I spoke with the psychiatrist in the inpatient unit, and he had said that there used to be a step-down program. So that's when I decided I'm going to write a letter and suggest that they have some kind of a program, an intermediate program that fills in that gap. So children and youth, 16, 17, 18, and then 19 to 26 can have a program that's specific to their needs and specific to them. I also wanted the psychiatrist on the outpatient side to know that her way of communicating with families was not good. So I did do a complaint to the physicians and surgeons. They did agree with the argument, and she did have to take an extra training course, which is like I didn't want her reprimanded in the sense of, but I wanted her to know her actions, a lot of her actions led to that path. So I think it was just all of that kind of combining with the fact that it took so long to figure out where to go, who to talk to. It wasn't easy, so I was trying to navigate those services. So I wanted to somehow have it that parents or even adults would have some kind of a path or a system where if they were in crises, they knew where to do or where to go and what services were available. So that's when we kind of started. I wanted to have some awareness to suicide and to youth mental health. So the same mother of the girl that Shane was very good friends with in the inpatient unit, she said, well, why don't you do a run? And I go, organize a run? How would I do that? I said, I know nothing about that. Our second daughter, Shannon, did a lot of Irish dancing, competitive Irish dancing. So I ran a lot of their feshes, the food-wise and barbecues and fundraising and stuff like that. I said, well, yeah, we could do like a barbecue or we could do this. So then I said, well, I'm really having issues here. Her name's Liz, I'll say her name. And Liz says, no, silly. She says, join a run. I said, oh. So then that's when the Scotiabank Waterfront Marathon came up. And that was exactly the same year that Ontario Shores was awarded, special status, that was going to be their primary charity for mental health services. So it was good timing. So we formed a team, Phoenix Rising, Team Shane, and we did, so some people signed up for the 5K run, Shannon and myself and a bunch of others. We did the half marathon. Never had run in my life before that. Luckily in the RAP program, one of the ladies there, her husband had done Boston marathons 5 or 6 times. She was a long distance runner. So her and her friends kind of took me under their wing and they said, well, if you're going to do this, you're going to need a plan. So you need to meet us at this time. And then they kind of started running. And so they got me through the summer doing the running and training, and then we all did the Scotiabank Marathon. The Shores had gotten a bus because they were the lead charity, so they had gotten a lot of people on board, signed up too to do the 5K. I was raising money, and I was, which I didn't know at the time, the CEO of the hospital had a team, and I go, who is this guy? I said this to Honor. I said, who is this guy? She said, well, he's the CFO, sorry, not the CEO, CFO. I said, who is this guy? And she goes, well, he's the chief financial advisor of the hospital. And I go, well, I'm going to beat him. He's not going to win. I'm going to beat him. So I think we were kind of neck and neck with, he'd get 1,000 more, I'd get 500 more. He'd get 500, I'd get 1,000. So we were kind of neck and neck all the way through. And in the end, I can't remember who did win in terms of getting the most. But we did raise over $10,000 that year. And it was all for youth mental health. And then at that time, because of the running, I had met some people up at the Whitby Running Room. And I said to John, because I was taking a half marathon program training course with him, and I said, John, is there any way that we can kind of put a run together specifically for youth mental health? So that was, I guess, September or October, right after the waterfront run. And he said, sure, we could do that. So December of the following year, 2015, or was it 2014? Maybe it was the same year, I don't know.
It was 2015, the first run.
That's it, okay, good. So we did the first Shane Shore run. And we've been doing it ever since.
And that's, for people that don't know, it takes place, or it starts and ends at the hospital. And,
yes.
And it brings people on site. Just before we get maybe a bit more into Shane's Shore Run and how people get involved, just want to pull back a little bit when you're talking about how you're dealing with this and changing the system. Like people talk about the mental health system, and there was one quote, or it's not a paraphrasing, but the mental health system is a system with a small s, not a capital S. If it was a capital S, then people would move through it, and flow through it, and not have to tell their story over and over again, not be cut off in services. And there are tremendous gaps in the mental health system, and I know Ontario Shores is very much aware of that, and that's one of the things that we're trying to work on and with our partners to make sure that people don't, even as simple as telling your story, right? We all go through a healthcare period, and it's you see a specialist or you see this person or that person, and you have to start from the beginning every time, and how frustrating that is. And there's been a lot of work on electronic health record to try and minimize that, but there is still like being able to transfer services, and there's lots of work to do is what I'm trying to say. And when I think about your experience, we talk about stigma and awareness, which is a huge part of what you're trying to do with Shane's legacy and the run. There's an even greater stigma around suicide.
Yes.
We talk about people who live with or diagnosed with complex mental illness, and nobody's bringing over dinner when you're diagnosed with like depression or schizophrenia, whereas if you have a physical health issue that's serious, people rally together and they do things for you. They offer to take your kids places to help alleviate pressure, or whatever the case may be. I don't think that happens with depression, schizophrenia, or any of these illnesses. And when you lose a child to suicide, do you have this like real sense of being alone in your community? Like, how did the people in your life, whether it be family or even your community, how did they react to your loss?
Yeah, so definitely a lot of stigma around suicide, and I think that's where the difference comes in with other losses as well, is that loneliness and that isolation. You feel cut off. Family members don't know what to say. People in general don't know what to say. They don't want to bring it up because they don't want to have you feel that pain intensity, or they don't want to trigger you, so then they avoid it. So no one's talking, no one's kind of checking in to see how you are. So it was, 2-3 years of, feeling like you're on an island, being completely alone, floating. It's like you were standing back and seeing the world in front of you pass by, like the world's going on, but you're stuck in that one little section of that island, trying to figure out how to cope, trying to figure out how am I supposed to react to this? What am I supposed to do? Suicide is the S word that no one speaks of, and I think there's people believe, and their belief is that, well, if we talk about it, it's going to cause more suicides. It's not going to be preventative, whereas the opposite is true. If you talk about suicide and you talk about mental health issues, I think that gives people some hope that, yes, there's something that can happen. It's not, and suicide is so final. Like it's if you take that leap off that bridge, halfway down you think, oops, I shouldn't have done this. There's no going back. It's not like in the movies where you can rewind. The same thing with mental health, it's true. Like if someone had a broken foot or diagnosed with cancer, or they just came and they had an angioplasty or something coronary, friends rally around them, I'll cut your lawn, I'll bring you over some dinners. But with suicide, none of that happens. There's no one bringing you dinners. There's no one saying, how can I help? Is there anything I can do for you? How are you feeling? There's none of that. And because of that, I think that's when people who go through that experience shut down as well. Because who can they talk to? The Toronto Distress Centre has been very instrumental in helping us, so I'm supporting them. I am now a volunteer with the Toronto Distress Centre. I went through their program for so I do now counsel one-on-one. I haven't made it up to the groups in terms of taking groups on, but I do meet with people who've recently had a suicide. And usually Alex, who is the director of the program, he matches you with, so I'm usually matched with a parent who has lost a child through suicide. So there's a whole program, it's 8 weeks long, and there's specific topics and things to deal with, emotions, support systems, what, and after the sessions, what you can be doing, who you can be talking to. So that's been a huge, but other than the Toronto Distress Center, and I'm not even sure how we got there. I don't know how that happened.
I can't remember either.
Either can I. It's a blur. So it's a couple years of a blur. But in terms of just trying to get help for suicide survivors, you meant all the shootings in the States and everything else. In the schools, you hear grief counselors, and I'm going, grief counselor? Maybe if I Google grief counseling, but nothing specific to, it's all more homicide. Nothing is specific to suicide. So I think that's a huge gap in society as well. And in terms of the mental health services, I think even Ontario Shores, their hands are tied by the government. They had started the program, TAY, Transitional Age Youth, and then they were told for funding purposes they could no longer do that. So that whole program for 16 to 27, 26, 27, they had to then break apart again because 18 and under is adolescents, 19 and above is adults. So they were going to be refused funding. So I think systemically it has to change at the government level. It has to, the Mental Health Act has to be changed to allow individuals to have services, and I think then places like Ontario Shores, Lakeridge Health, and Frontenac and all of those places that are offering services can then access and programs and design programs towards the needs of what's needed there. But until that happens, everyone's hands are tied. So it's not so much Ontario Shores' problem, it's the Mental Health Act and the government in terms of their funding criteria.
So currently, we'll still get to the details of the run, but on top of that, you're a volunteer here
Yes.
on our family council, and you've been part of a campaign for us in 2019. Both of you featured in billboards sharing the grief, around the loss of Shane. So you do a lot of work with the hospital, and you have this kind of mixed experience, with your son. So why do you support the hospital, help try to raise money? Why are you, so involved today in helping assisting Ontario Shores?
Pretty much for the same reason. I think it's all about awareness. I think it's about having funds there to then have the hospital access those funds for the youth. So I know a lot of the time, in the inpatient unit, they needed art supplies, but they didn't have the money for art supplies. So the money from the run is helping and allowing them to purchase, I'm gonna say tools, but it's because it's used for art therapy. They were instrumental in buying guitars. They now have a music therapy program. So all of that is aiding and assisting in the youth today in the hopes that because that money's there and they can access some of those programs that they weren't able to offer because there was no funding, that's going to help a youth down a different path. So instead of at the crossroads, there's nothing for me, life's too painful, the only answer is suicide. Maybe I've got a choice here. Maybe there's other pathways I can take. Maybe there's other supports. Maybe there's someone who is on my side. And learning through, the art therapy, how to express their emotions. So I think that's why I'm so involved, because I don't want another family to have to deal with the death of their child. I know there's a lot of prevalence in the elderly as well as adults for suicide, but our focus, because of Shane, is in the youth mental health and youth awareness, trying to get the stigma of suicide and the stigma, there's still stigma around mental health. We have a friend who, because of mental health, disability was denied because they were saying no. And so I think even now, even though it's been so prevalent in the last 5-6 years, it's still an issue. You know, it's not. It's like, well, you can see your arms in a cast, but you can't see that your head's ready to blow up because, you know, you're dealing with either all these voices through psychosis or, you know, you're bipolar and your moods are just going up and down to mania to deep down to depression. People just think it's behavioral or, they're just moody.
Like you mentioned earlier,
yeah.
And, you know, it's one of the few illnesses where the more ill you are, the more people back away, as opposed to, you know, a physical health issue. Specific to the event, so you mentioned, you know, kind of how Shane's short run came about. I know you do the medals, right?
I do the medals for the run, and
with your woodworking expertise, right?
Yes.
And we just last you know,
Last year.
2 years ago, I started doing the T-shirts as well.
Oh, nice. So when is the event? You know, what can people expect, and how can they register?
So it's this year's Shane's Shore Run is on September the 25th. It's the last Sunday in September. September has been deemed Mental Health Awareness Month, so it's corresponding to that. It takes place here on site. It's a walk, 5K, 10K walk or run. You can join teams, you can make a team. All of the profits and all of the money goes to youth mental health, inpatient, outpatient, anything in the youth, and you know, that's described from anything from 12 up to, I'm going to say 30, although the hospital says 26 or 27. But so it's available. The funds are then available to each of the psychiatrists, each of the units, so they have access. So if they're running, say, a DBT group and they want to order pizza for the kids, they can order pizza. If they want to provide them all with workbooks because the families can't afford the workbooks, they have the money to get the workbooks. And all of that is then helping with the youth, but at the same time, the run hopefully is awareness for the community of youth mental health and trying to get down those barriers of the stigma. So, you know, people think way back, you know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is an example. Movies, how they depict, you know, crazy people, you know, violent people. And they're not. They could be your neighbor. It could be, you know,
they are your neighbor.
They are your neighbor.
Right? There's
you know?
one in five people.
Yeah,
and
exactly. So I think it's just trying to get rid of that stigma, both the suicide and, you know, talking about suicide doesn't mean that it's going to be more prevalent. It's going to actually help someone. And then the youth services, you know, letting them know, like, they may, you know, their family may have abandoned them and they have no one else except maybe the person that they're seeing here at the shores, who is then taking an interest in them, listening to them, and then that makes them feel, yes, I'm a person that somebody is respecting and looking out for. You know, because a lot of the times, and it happened with our next door neighbor, like if something happens, you know, they kick the kids out of the house, which I think is the worst thing they can do. But again, they don't know enough about mental health, and addictions is a big one as well.
And before I started on Ontario Shores, so more than 10 years ago, my first experience was participating in a run that started here and ended here. Not Shane's Shore Run, but it was another one. And, you know, for me back then, it was an eye-opening experience, you know, coming on the grounds, seeing the property, coming into the main lobby and the cafeteria and seeing the natural light. And then I think back to a comment you made about not knowing this place even existed, even though, you know, you live in the community. How important is it for, and then you mentioned like the media stigma associated with mental illness. How important is it for people to see this place and understand, maybe they won't access it, but in 10 years, maybe they might have to. How important do you think that is, just to understanding the resources in your community?
I think it's extremely important, because when you're dealing with a crisis, or you're in that situation where you know there's something going on, but you don't know what, and you don't know who to turn to. And if you go to your family doctor and they don't support or they don't know anything, which is...
Well, the family doctor first said you don't want to...
You don't want to go down that road.
You don't want to label them.
Don't want to label them. So, you know, in our case, family doctor, and that's the first thing they'll say. They'll say, go to the doctor or go to Emerge. Emerge is there's a lot that can be said about emergency departments for someone going through a mental health crisis. That's the wrong place for them. They're dealt with very harshly, they're dealt with unfairly, they're dealt with a lot of stigma. But we won't go down that road. That's another campaign. But I think it's really important and crucial for the community to see the grounds, to see that, you know, it's not everyone in cages and locked up and, you know, in straitjackets. You know, people, the different units, they allow, you know, people to wander through the road, you know. I think that integration into the community and society is very important, just to break down those barriers and the walls. And I forgot to mention that Shane Shore Run, you can register through the Whitby or the Running Room. So you'd go onto the Running Room website, search Shane Shore Run, and then it pops up, and then you can register through there.
I was going to say, aside from, you know, the fundraising piece and you know, the change that you're able to make, does the event help you personally in terms of your ability to deal with the loss of Shane? Does it help keep his, you know, spirit alive, if you will? Like, how does it? How does his memory, you know, work with the event in your minds?
People, when we like, sometimes they're scared to talk about Shane, and I tell them, no, I want to hear his name. I don't want him to be forgotten. So I actually got a tattoo done that Debbie didn't know I was getting done. And I use it to, people ask me about the tattoo and they see it, then I can talk about Shane and talk about mental health to them, and it helped me open up a conversation with strangers and that.
And then with the run, it's meant to be a family fun field, so it's not like a competitive run, like the Waterfront Marathon, you know, it's competitive. And a lot of the other runs through the Running Room and the running groups, other Canada Running Series, it's, you sign up and you're basically, you know, running for a time or running to complete. So this one here is a fun-filled activity for families. So it's to get families involved, families to recognize that maybe, you know, something's going on in your own family, or if not now, maybe down the road, you might, you know, a colleague at work might say, hey, my son's doing this, or my daughter's acting like this, what do you think? And then they would think, oh, well, I was at this run, and maybe it could be mental health. Have you thought of that? So it's hoping that that small little pebble develops ripples, so that then someone, as you said, they may not need it services now, but down the road they might need, and then they can think, okay, we were at this center.
Yeah,
you know?
it didn't seem so scary.
Yeah.
And like your comment just really resonated with me, Mel. It's like, I think when it comes to, as a society, when it comes to death, I mean, we're afraid to mention the person's name, regardless of what their cause of death is, because we feel like it's going to hurt the person, you know, who's experiencing that loss. But as you know, most of us have experienced loss, and I know personally, I feel exactly the same way. Like having lost my dad, I want people to mention his name. You want that opportunity to talk about him, you know, and it's just because, you know, I lost my dad in a different way than you lost your son doesn't mean you don't want to talk about him. I think that's important for people to know, because it's very much the opposite, I would say. I would imagine you feel people choose their words carefully around you, or at least, you know, early in those days when you're experiencing that loss.
Yeah, they do. Either that or they avoid you completely. So, which is the worst thing they can do.
It's funny with Shane Shore Run as well, because we have all people who've never run before coming out, and at the start line they'll say to me, what if I can't do the 5K? And I said, it doesn't matter if you go 100 yards and come back again. The important thing is that you're here doing it.
Great. Well, we're happy you're here doing this, and I can't imagine, even after 8 years, it's easy to talk about you know, the particulars of losing your son, but it really will help people, especially people who maybe are going through a difficult time with their own children, or, you know, have experienced, you know, a similar loss that you have. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for all the things you do for our
Can I show my tattoo?
Yeah, maybe Jordan, our camera guy, can.
This is my son Shane. I had it done
Very soon.
Yeah, about a month after we lost him.
Oh, wow.
And I use that when people see it, they ask me what the tattoo's about, and it allows me to open up a conversation with the people.
Yeah. And how do you find those conversations go?
Some go very smoothly. Other ones all depend on the day, and then the tears flow, and the people try to apologize. I say, no, it's fine.
You have it there for a reason, right?
It's there for the reason to talk. Yeah.
Well, thank you for both talking today, and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.